This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. I'm Stephen Mansfield. It's great to have you with me. Let's dive right in. You recently have heard a bunch of stir about the Kurds, and I am disturbed by what you have heard because it's not true. And I'll have to tell you, I've spent a lot of my last decades advising people in D.C., explaining who the Kurds are, explaining who they aren't, explaining what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. And so it has been frustrating, I have to tell you, during the Trump administration to have that go to a whole new level. Now, I think most of you know that I'm right of center politically. I'm glad for a lot of things that Trump does. I'm disturbed by the way he often does them. We're doing good things in the world. Some things are positive, some things are questionable. But every so often, an administration reveals what it doesn't know about a topic that's pretty vital to our national interests. And I happen to have some experience with the Kurds, happen to travel a lot in that part of the world, happen to be with a lot of those leaders, have written a book on the Kurds, have done a TED Talk about the Kurds, have testified before Congress, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just giving you my mini resume for those who might be new and not know that I've got a little history with the Kurds. I'm not the leading expert of the world. I'm not their primary advocate in the U.S. I'm not a U.S. ambassador, to Iraq or Iran. But I am experienced, a little bit experienced. So people often call me, people often ask me to explain. And it's interesting with this present administration because they don't seem to know much about the Kurds, and there's not apparently someone advising them, or if they are, there are good people at the State Department, good people in this administration who are very, very knowledgeable about the Middle East. But something's not reaching the top. I think I've laughed with you before on this podcast when a friend of mine, Rahim Rashidi, who is a Kurdish K-24 journalist, was in a press conference with Trump. Trump wanted to call on him, which was gracious of President Trump to do. And not confusing his name with his ethnicity, he said, Mr. Kurd, your question next. Well, okay. He represented Kurdistan 24 television. He's Kurdish. I guess that's what came to Donald Trump's mind. But, that would be like saying to a French journalist, okay, Frenchie, or what have you, in other words, using their nationality as their name. Okay, funny, humorous. Rahim Rashidi has now made his Twitter feed or his X feed. He's titled it Mr. Kurd. He's having a lot of fun with it. The Kurds laugh and enjoy that. But recently now, Donald Trump has actually made the public statement that he's mad at the Kurds. He doesn't like them because they take, and they never give anything back. That's the summary of what he has said. The presenting issue of that statement was that apparently he's under the impression that some weapons were given to the Kurds so that they would then go into Iran and begin being counterinsurgents. Well, I'll tell you that part of the problem with most of the proclamations, most of the statements that come out of the Trump administration regarding the Kurds is they speak of them as though the Kurds are a nation. The Kurds do not have their own nation. They'd like to. They don't. They are spread all over the Middle East. They are throughout Europe. They are in the United States. And so when you speak of the Kurds, you're speaking of an ethnicity. Much like you might speak of, this is not the best example, but like the Cherokee or the Apache. You're not speaking of one state. You're not speaking of one nation. You're not speaking of one country. You're speaking of a people group who laps over a great many different areas. And so this is exactly what it's like with the Kurds. Well, all that to say that apparently the assumption has been in the Trump administration that they gave some weapons to a Kurdish unit, hoping that they would then go in and be insurgents in Iran, as I've said. But nobody can tell us who this is. And the Kurds that I'm talking to say they don't know anything about it. Never heard of it. Don't know it. And by the way, I both heard Kurds, prominent Kurds, talking early on in the war, and I've also talked to some of them myself, and they've said, we have been begging not to have to be involved here. We have been begging not to be used by Western powers as warriors in this war, because what's going to happen is the Western powers are going to come in, they're going to bomb Iran, maybe they'll engage in regime change, and then we will be sitting there after the war is gone, after the Western powers have receded, and we'll still have to deal with the fallout from this thing. We'll still have terrorists, we'll still have militias, we'll still have insurgents. So could they just come in and do the job? The other issue, of course, is that we are the minority, they're saying, in this region. For example, Iran has approximately 93 million people. About 15 million of them are Kurds. Iraq is slightly larger, but the percentages are about the same. And so you begin to say, well, why is it that when the West goes to war in the Middle East, it always wants the Kurds to arm up and go to war? And some of their leaders who are very Western educated, very educated at some of the best schools in the West, are able to say very well with Western idioms, well, we're not the gunslingers of the Middle East. We're not the hired guns of the world. So the problem is that, again, the administration, I know, like I say, smart people in Washington who do understand this, but this administration makes public pronouncements as though they don't understand what the situation is with the Kurds. The Kurds are distributed throughout a variety of countries. They are not the majority in any country. As I just said, 15 million of them. In Iran, a population of 93 million. Again, slightly larger Kurdish population and slightly larger population in general in Iraq. There are, as I've said before, 300,000 Kurds in Jerusalem, most of them Jewish, given the history of the Kurds, the Medes, and intermixing with with Jewish history. There are Kurds, of course, in Nashville, Kurds, of course, in Dallas, Kurds, of course, in Detroit, Kurds in California. There are Kurds all over the world in small amounts, but they're not a decisive majority anywhere. That's, of course, part of the problem. They don't have their own homeland. Their emotional homeland is in roughly the northern part of Iraq, northern part of Syria, northern part of Iran, southeastern portion of Turkey. And that's part of the problem. Their emotional homeland, their ancient homeland, is now taken over by some of the bitchiest countries in the world. And so they're not likely to have that homeland unless some things dramatically change. So the Kurds are a people. They number in about 40 to 50 million worldwide. By the way, makes them much larger than many, many nations. Think about it, 5 times the size of Israel. And they do not have their own homeland because of persecutions. They are distributed all over the Middle East, throughout much of the world. And they have been some of the most persecuted people in the world. Saddam gassed them, took out entire towns in one day with gassings. Halabja in 1988, 10,000 people ultimately died. 5,000 people died immediately. The Turks have just persecuted the Kurds, outlawed their language, banned education, banned their poetry, banned the speaking of their language. As I've said, I was in the souk in the Grand Market in Istanbul one time, and when I was early on in my history in the Middle East, and just happened to say the word Kurdistan, and immediately those with me said, "Don't say that, don't say that, don't say that." And people were looking at me as though I had just said something foul, and you could tell that just the word Kurdistan, which means homeland of the Kurds, was fighting words, basically. So what concerns me is that the Trump administration, if Donald Trump represents it in what he's saying, are angry with the Kurds. But the Kurds have been loyal allies to the United States. We have been grateful for them. I mean, they have been grateful for us, I meant to say. They have expressed that repeatedly, no-fly zones and Western investment and protection from Saddam. They recognize that it's the Western powers and their air power that saved them from Saddam. They recognize that the only reason you even have a KRG, Kurdish Regional Government in northern Iraq, is that Western powers have provided security at strategic moments. In return, the Kurds fought with us against ISIS and fought with us against Saddam and were at our sides. I've talked to grizzled warriors in the Pentagon and retired, etc., who fought in the Middle East and our wars in the Middle East. And when I mention the Kurds, they literally tear up, remembering the loyalty and the devotion and the skill of the Kurds who fought at their side. So these are our allies. These are people we should go with. You've heard me say many times on this podcast that the Kurds are the way we want the Middle East to go in the sense that they are moderate Muslims, they are pro-Christian, pro-Jewish. Many of them that I know turn to Jerusalem to pray, not to Mecca. They consider extremist Islam to be a process of Arabization. As soon as the Kurds got control of their affairs in northern Iraq, they got hooked up with the NASDAQ, began to give incentives for foreign investment, and connected to the West. So the Kurds have done everything. And by the way, they welcome me. They know exactly who I am, Christian, American, etc. They know who I am. They know why I'm there. They know what I'm doing. And I don't have any official role. I don't want to give you any impression like that. I don't want to accidentally overstate. I'm no big deal. I'm just their friend. But totally welcome me, know who I am. I've sat with a senior mullah in Iraqi Kurdistan, talked about extremism, on and on and on and on. The welcome's unbelievable. There's actually a Christian office in the KRG's government in Erbil and in other places to make sure that Christian affairs are taken care of, make sure that Christians are protected, to make sure that they're encouraged. You couldn't have better allies in the Middle East unless it was Israel, and there's a lot of connection between Israel and the Kurds in various regions. And in Iran, by the way, a lot of the protests against the regime that led to this war, by the way, thousands and thousands and thousands killed by the regime when those riots and those protests began to happen. A lot of them were led by the Kurds, who are young, Western-friendly, connected to their cousins in Iraqi Kurdistan and other regions that are very much Western-connected. My point is, these are our allies, and they don't know what the president's talking about. What weapons do you think we stole? We begged you not to use us as hired guns. You say you gave us weapons. You're accusing us of stealing them and not giving them to Kurdish insurgents in Iran. We don't know what you're talking about. And we've been your allies at your side. So for the president of the United States to say, I'm mad at or hate the Kurds, because they take and never give anything back, is just foolish. We want to build with the Kurds. We want them as allies. We need them. We want a lot of the Middle East to go in their direction. They have been loyal. They have been faithful. They have fought at our sides. I've told you before, and I'm not making myself the big hero of the story, but I've told you before that I got caught with a bunch of other Americans in a riot, an anti-Christian riot, and a bunch of Kurds jumped on me to protect me. 3 or 4 Kurds, no joke. I often joke when I'm telling the story in Kurdish regions that it takes 3 Kurds to make me. I'm so big. But they all jumped on me to protect me, make sure I wasn't hit. I could go on and on and on. The hospitality, the love, the welcome. Kind of a cute story that'll give you a sense of their culture. I was visiting D.C. My wife and I were going to D.C. Of course, I lived there, but I was there just for a short time to visit. And my sister-in-law, who at that time was probably 76, was with us, and she was learning about the Kurds just a little bit from my books and the speaking that I had done, and just being kind of related to us, knowing about our world. And when we went to the White House, just to show my sister-in-law and her husband the White House, there was a protest going on, and it was a Kurdish protest. Well, immediately what enters your mind probably is a protest against the United States. No, it was actually a demonstration of affection and love for America. They were walking around in great big circles saying, "Down with ISIS, thank you, America, we love America, up with freedom." And one of my favorite memories in all of in-law life is that my 76-year-old sister-in-law said, do they mean what they're saying? I said, absolutely. And I was getting wired up to do an interview. The Kurdish press suddenly saw that I was there and began to interview me, so I got kind of pulled away. Next thing I know, Bev and her sister, my sister-in-law, are marching in this demonstration, chanting with the Kurds. Kurdish women have their arms around them. They're walking around, down with ISIS, up with America. Thank you, America, up with freedom. This is who the Kurds are. When they demonstrate in D.C., they're not anti-Semitic. They're not killing anybody. They're not beating up Jews. They're not demanding anything. They're thanking America for their role, for the American role in their history. Now, it's time for a reset. And I'm saying this with some passion because it's a cause I care very much about. I don't believe that Donald Trump intends evil, but he has said things repeatedly against the Kurds that are either not true or a result of a massive misunderstanding. And I remember that Ambassador Bolton, and I realize he's no big fan of Donald Trump, but Ambassador Bolton in his book said that Trump doesn't like the Kurds because they're the losers of history. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it's quoted and it's in his book, and I'm quoting directly. And I'm wondering if that's the way it's perceived in this administration. I'm wondering if the Kurds are perceived as down and outers. I'm wondering if Donald Trump really thinks the Kurds are just beggars who hide their hands out all the time but never give anything back. And if that's true, if that's what he believes, I want to speak to those of you who listen to my podcast, and thank you for doing it, who are part of the administration. I want to speak to those of you who are in Congress, the Senate, House. I want to speak to those of you who are in the State Department who listen to this podcast. You correspond with me all the time, and I really appreciate it. Try to turn this understanding. The Kurds can be massive allies for us in some of the most strategic countries of the world. They're pressing on 50 million now because of their birth rate and their healthiness and their newfound prosperity. They're going to be at 100 million before I shake off this khaki coil. They're going to be significant. They may even be able to bring about their own homeland. If not, they're going to be significant in other nations. We want them as allies. They deserve to have our friendship. They've earned it, just as we've earned a place of respect with them. I want to urge you to read some good books on the Kurds. I want to urge you to check out K24, Kurdistan 24, which is one of the better news outlets. And you can just get the app for K24 and then choose English as the language. I want to urge you to get up to speed on what's going on. Watch some good things on YouTube that are free and get up to speed about the Kurds. They're fascinating. They're loyal. They're devoted. They're fierce. They're amazing. They love America. They want us to love them, and we should be, because whatever's coming next, a restructuring in Iran, a restructuring in the Middle East, tighter connections to Israel, whatever it is, the Kurds are there in the middle of it. We want them as allies. We want them as friends. We want them well-educated. We want them prosperous. We want them Western connected. And we don't have to hope for them to be, I'm not preaching at this moment from my faith. If they continue to be the moderate Muslims that they are, they will simply be a tremendous force for good in the world, because we need some moderate Muslims in this increasingly radicalized world. So long live Kurdistan. And I love my Kurdish friends. And those of you in Washington who listen to this, help turn the tide. There's some dangerous things being said by this administration. I think they're in the heat of the moment. I think they're based in ignorance. I think they're based in a fundamental misunderstanding of who the Kurds are on the part of Mr. Trump. And maybe it's time for Mr. Trump on one of his international trips to land that big old jet of his at the airport in Erbil. I've done it many times. It'll change his world. Now, thank you for listening. This is important. This is critical. This is what it means to be aware of what's going on in the world we're called to live in.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.